Hey, Dan here with the Village Church, and I'm going to try something a bit different this week and post a video a day to help you process the idea of inclusion as it relates to the mission of the church. So check out the video each day or watch it in its entirety all on Sunday. It's totally up to you. We've been looking into some stories of God's church in a book of the Bible called Acts of the Apostles. We've discovered that some key things that happen there remind us that the church's mission is to show Jesus and his love in our actions and tell others about Jesus and what he has done and how he gives us life. We've seen that it takes a whole village, many people, to care for each other, and that's why the disciples continue to give responsibilities to others to care for each other. That's one of the reasons we've started our tiny village churches, so that God's church can continue to grow. We also realize that even when we see and believe things differently, that shouldn't discourage us, because we are still pursuing the same mission, letting Jesus be known and lived out. So this week we're going to take a look at Jesus' words in Acts chapter 1 starting to come true. He told his first followers that they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, which is what we see in Acts chapters 2 to 7, and in Judea and Samaria, which is what we start to see here in chapter 8, and the ends of the earth. It starts happening. So tune in each day for a short video or watch it in its entirety on Sunday. And if Jesus is spreading to the world, does that mean Jesus is exclusive or inclusive? And that's what we're talking about today. So when you hear the word inclusive, what words come to your mind? Things like broad, full, whole, without exception, all, everything, included. I think of something like a trip, one of those vacations where it's all inclusive. So I pay one price and then get all the stuff, all the food, all the travel, the room that I stay in, it's all included in the price. What about when you hear the word exclusive? What words come to your mind? Maybe words like limited, unique, only some, privileged, or private. I think of something like a private golf club. When you pay a certain fee, then you belong. It's fancy, but only available for some. It's exclusive. Which of these words do you feel has a more positive description to it? Some may say exclusive because it maybe comes with the idea of better. There's perks, there's a members-only experience. But if someone described you as inclusive or exclusive, which would you want them to choose and why? Chat with your family today about how you would want to be described, as inclusive or exclusive. Do you want to be described as inclusive or exclusive? I'd probably want people to describe me as the kind of person who welcomes everyone, who treats everyone the same. For someone to say, everyone's important to Dan, boy, that would really encourage me. And if people said, Dan's fancy and privileged, you got to be a certain kind of somebody to sit and have coffee with him, that would kind of make me sad. So would you say Jesus is inclusive or exclusive? Because there's a reason we say the Village Church is a place where everyone belongs. There's a reason why we overwhelmingly hear that people like being a part of the Village Church, because they can just be themselves and don't feel judged. So a little background on the story that we're going to look at today. In the beginning of these writings we call Acts of the Apostles, Jesus tells his first followers that they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem. And we saw that happen in Acts chapters 2 to 7. The people are going around Jerusalem telling everyone how awesome Jesus was, telling all the Jewish people and a lot of the Greek people that lived there too. But he also said they would be his witnesses in Judea and Samaria. And we start to see that happen in the story last week. All of Samaria became open to Jesus, and many people were hearing from the Apostle Philip and believing the truth of Jesus and being baptized, and they were seeing their lives changed, even Simon the sorcerer. And then Acts chapter 8 is important because of who is being preached to. We see in Acts chapter 8 verses 4 to 8 a story of Philip preaching about Jesus to a group of Samaritans. To put it lightly, Jewish people and Samaritan people didn't get along. Remember that old story about the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, where there's this person hurt and on the side of the road, and the Jewish priests don't help him. They cross to the other side of the road, but then the Samaritan man comes and helps him. Or there's another story about Jesus talking to a Samaritan woman at a well getting water. And this was a big deal because the Jewish people hated Samaritans and didn't talk to each other. And men didn't sit and talk with women at a well. There has been generations of conflict between these two people groups of the Samaritans and the Jewish people because they had different beliefs about worship, the Bible, priestly authority, and a whole bunch of other things. And so the relationship would have been the same as the Jewish-Palestinian conflict in the Middle East that we see today. Neither group associates with the other. But in this story, we see Jesus, a Jewish man, sitting and talking with a Samaritan woman. That would have been a terrible thing. It would have been a big deal for him to do that. So because the church is being imprisoned by this guy named Saul in the book of Acts, and all the government officials are arresting him, the church just scatters. They run away to parts unknown in Samaria and Judea. But one thing they continue to do no matter where they find themselves is tell people that Jesus loves them, that he's died for them, that he's come back from the dead for them. He is a life giver. Is there anything that you have as a reason for not talking to someone about Jesus? Talk about that with your family and friends today, and tune in tomorrow for part 3. In a cultural climate of people hating who is different is where we get the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts chapter 8, verses 26 to 40, and you can read it there. We don't even get his name. He's just called the Ethiopian eunuch. But just from that description, we learn a whole bunch of stuff about him. The Ethiopian eunuch is a foreigner, so he's not from Samaria or Jerusalem. He's African, so he's from Ethiopia. It says he was the minister of finance for the queen of Ethiopia, so that means he's rich, and it means he belongs to a royal court. We know that he can read because it says he was reading the prophet Isaiah's writings, and most people in those days didn't know how to read, only some did, so he's educated. And he must be a person of faith to come all the way from Ethiopia to Jerusalem and make that pilgrimage to learn about God. That's quite a journey. And he is a eunuch. Well, what is a eunuch anyways? Well, a eunuch in this time are typically people that were castrated before puberty, which means they had their testicles removed. Lots of us just say balls. Sometimes that happened with their consent, but usually not. And as a result, they didn't experience puberty. They retained higher voices. They didn't develop body hair or facial hair like many men do. They looked and sounded different from the men and women around them. They were also mostly single and childless. And in a world where everyone seemed to be part of a family unit of some sort, they stood out as loners. So God actually guides Philip to go meet the Ethiopian eunuch on the road as this guy's riding in his chariot reading the book of the Bible written by Isaiah. Philip asks him if he understands what he's reading, and he says, "How can I understand without some help?" Well, wait a minute, wasn't he just in Jerusalem at the temple? Why didn't he just have a priest or leader there explain the text to him? Well, that probably wouldn't have happened because since he was foreign to Jerusalem, as an Ethiopian, he wouldn't have been allowed in the inner temple court, which is where the teachings would have been heard. Also, because he was a eunuch, he wouldn't have been let in because the book of the law in Deuteronomy, it says, it's written there in chapter 23, no man whose testicles are crushed or whose penis is cut off can belong to the Lord's assembly. That sucks in more ways than one. So even though he had a high respect for the Jewish faith, and he would have been left on the outskirts and not allowed to participate in the religious practices. So imagine being this guy, standing at the temple in Jerusalem, and there's crowds of people, tons of courtyards and fountains, and just a buzz of activity. And it's a highly gendered space too, so men and young men are on one side, and then women and children are on the other side. And there's areas designated for foreigners and for Gentiles, and everyone is in their place. But where do you fit in? Where do you belong? Where are the places you feel you don't belong or fit in? So imagine you're putting yourself in the sandals of this Ethiopian eunuch, and you're observing the different designated areas of the temple, and you see all the families, and you wonder as a eunuch, where do I go? How do I feel being in this space where family is so central? In the text, we find the eunuch on a return trip home to Ethiopia. This black, surgically altered, gender variant, rich civil servant reads aloud from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah, specifically chapter 53. So try to look at Acts chapter 8 and Isaiah 53 from the perspective of the eunuch. Imagine you're a child taken from your home and your parents, taken to another country. Men held you down. They operated on you as you lay frozen with fear. You feel the searing pain of castration, and you suffered a long recovery. You grew up, but you never experienced puberty. As boys matured, you didn't change in the same ways. You began your work in the royal court, serving the queen. You long to be in a family again and even to have your own children, but you're busy and you know that's not going to happen. Non-eunuchs in the court would respect you and mock you, sometimes at the same time. They envied your fancy status in the palace and then teased you for being less than a man. You feel rejected and alone. Your health is affected often because of the surgery as a child, and you kind of grow up fragile because you lack testosterone. Your bones grow brittle. Your heart grows bitter. Then at the temple, you get a piece of scripture, a writing about a man of sorrow acquainted with grief. You're curious about this person. Is the prophet Isaiah speaking of himself or somebody else? And you read the words, and it's like you're looking in a mirror. Isaiah 53 says, "He was like a sheep being led to be killed. He was quiet as a lamb is quiet while its wool is being cut. He never opened his mouth. He was shamed and was treated unfairly. He died without children to continue his family. His life on earth has ended." These words in the Bible would rattle you, but in a good way, because it's pointing you to the same things you are experiencing. How do your experiences of life connect with God? How do they not connect with God? Talk about that with your family and friends today. We're talking about the Ethiopian eunuch, and being a eunuch, he would have had no family, would have felt pretty alone. And you'd feel the weight of these words that he read in Isaiah chapter 53 because he identifies with it. And this is a prophecy about Jesus, so he's finding hope in Jesus. And you continue reading, and he comes to chapter 56, and you discover this extraordinary promise from God to both foreigners and eunuchs. And being that guy, it would be a promise for you. And here's the words. God says, "Guard my common good. Do what's right and do it in the right way. For salvation is just around the corner. My setting things right is about to go into action. How blessed are you who enter into these things, you men and women who embrace them. Who keeps Sabbath and they don't defile it. They watch their step and they don't do anything evil. Make sure no outsider who now follows God ever has the occasion to say, 'God put me in second class. I don't really belong.' And make sure no eunuch or physically mutilated person is ever made to think, 'I'm damaged goods. I don't really belong.' For this is what God says, 'To the mutilated who keep my Sabbath and choose what delights me and keep a firm grip on my promise, I'll provide them an honored place in my family and within my city, even more honored than that of sons and daughters.'" Wow, no wonder he goes home rejoicing. Everything he's ever wanted, to be a family, to belong, it's now promised in these words. Every aspect of his life as a mutilated person, an outsider, different from everyone else, he's now being told these things are going to give him honor as he discovers God's delights and he holds on to God's promises. He's going to be part of a family more honored than a son or a daughter. This is why he asks Philip in verse 37, "What would keep me from being baptized?" Because in his reality, he had many things in his life that kept him from experiencing God. All the rules of religion that said he's a foreigner, he's a eunuch, he's not a man or a woman, so he has no place with God, and that simply is not true. That's why Philip baptizes him right then and there at the side of the road where the water was, because he needs to experience the full, inclusive, no boundaries or labels acceptance of God. I wonder what happens when someone who looks like an Ethiopian eunuch crosses our path or connects to God's church. Do they go home rejoicing that they've just been accepted? See, this is the mission of God's church, to let everyone who feels like they are on the outside know that they are loved and accepted, that anyone who has been excluded by the world is actually included by God. Some people really want the approval of the world, and they pursue the world's ways of self and wealth and fame and status. And still others of us reach for those things because we're just simply drowning, grasping at anything that's going to make us feel okay. Anything that's going to allow us to numb the pain and make us believe that we matter. And it's in that moment that we discover God. Not us earning God's approval, but experiencing his acceptance, welcoming us into these big arms of God that hug us and tell us, you belong here. What can you do to bring this truth of God and the message of belonging to everyone? What can you do to bring it to someone? I pray that that would be the case. God is awesome, and he loves you, and he loves every single person, and it's with Christ that you truly find peace. Have a great week. I just want to encourage you to hit all the like buttons on this video. It helps us to know that you're watching. As well, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page and our Instagram, and do ask how you can be included in one of our tiny village churches.